So in looking at where we are, one of the things you mentioned, 2% or 2.7% in the state operating funds above the governor's, or above last year. The governor's made a concerted effort, although maybe straying from it outside the state operated funds, but trying to stay within that 2%. By doing that, he ends up dealing with out-year gaps. He gets a more balanced budget by doing that for some of the alarm he gave before of how big a gap we were dealing with. How do you make up that difference by you're putting more spending in? How do you make up that difference to balance things out?
So a lot of that increase is represented by school aid, is our addition in school aid. So what we do is in various places we have increased revenues that, and I could go through some of the specifics of some of our revenues, but we make up the difference by adding some revenues. We also disallow some of the transfer of expenses to capital, and that increases our available
how much in actual revenue enhancers or taxes, how much do you increase above the governor's proposal?
So the Assembly's actions increased revenues 1.85 above the governor in this fiscal. Well, that's our increases. So the net increase is going to be over the governor's 1.837 for this fiscal year, this coming fiscal year.
And you started to go there, so you might as well. For the next fiscal year, it also would have an implication.
Right, so that it grows going in the out years. Next fiscal year, our net increase would be 3.867. In 2021, it would be 4.994, and in 21-22 would be 5.501. Billion, obviously. Yes.
Yes.
More.
We learned in the Ways and Means meeting the reserve funds all stay as the governor proposed. You don't make changes.
We do add. We don't change the governor's reserve funds, but we do add, as part of our revenue enhancements, we end up with an additional 535 in the revenue in the reserve fund.
Now, I like the governor's proposal that takes half of whatever's left over at the end of the year and puts it toward our state debt, I believe. You reject that proposal.
Yes.
My sense would be that actually I was kind of excited we were doing that as we try to look at ways we could reduce our debt going forward. But what's that? The other thing, my sense would be also we have settlement money that you're agreeing to use for operating dollars, $383 million going to the financial plan and $194 to operating of the MTA. Why not use that money for, though if you aren't going to use it on the debt or don't want to do that, why not use that for the operating and leave that settlement dollars to one-time things, which I think is what we've all agreed on, or most of us would suggest that is being the best way of a steward of those dollars. We aren't going to see them again. Let's use those for one time, or let's hold those in reserve as opposed to a fund balance and not, spend those now.
Well, we don't designate where the 535 in the reserve fund should go, so it could be allocated to debt if we wanted to. Well, let me go to the settlement funds. Part of putting some of the settlement funds in the subway action plan. In some way, it is a one-time proposal to go forward. And as part of our transit revenue actions, we are increasing, we will be establishing this transit sustainability fund so that that will take over from the one-time, that will supplement and will basically obviate the need for that settlement, that 70, the 194, that'll be generating over $500 million we project going forward.
On debt, I believe you stay similar to where the governor is. Year to year, how much does the governor's and your one house, how much would it increase year to year debt?
So based on our actions, we would decrease the right. So the remaining debt cap for fiscal year going for that's next year. No, this is this. Okay, it would be 147 lower, and then going forward, it would be 86. Next year's 86 million next year, 87 million the following year, 22 million in 2022, and in 22, 23 would be 13.
So that's dealing with the debt cap. How about the actual debt just year to year? What are we allowing through this plan and the governor's plan?
So we are down 147 over the governor to $55 billion.
And so what is it really, the governor? I'm sorry.
We're at 55.2 billion.
And compared to last year? Do we
compared to last year?
Or to the current fiscal year, I guess.
Yes. So it is an increase of 5.9% over last year.
Thank you.
Well, and again, we do have that 500 million, 500 plus million set aside if needed.
Understood. One of the things that you have done in this budget in raising dollars is having increasing, some would call it a super millionaires tax or whatever. We have a tax on high earners. Now we would be creating a higher tax on higher earners and graduating that significantly. And so some of the issues related to that, obviously we heard from the governor in the fall of saying we don't know what the federal tax bill is going to be. If they do certain things, it's a missile being delivered at New York State. And we heard a lot of concern of saying it's going to put our high earners in New York at a competitive disadvantage. We're worried about them leaving. And so a number of those concerns have been raised. We've had the federal changes now. We know some of the impacts, and I know, the top 1% or so of our earners are putting 40% already into the overall state PIT. This would change those numbers. I haven't seen the analysis of how much that might do. In fact, I suppose that's a question I could ask you. Do you have any sense in your analysis of doing this, what the percent of the total we're going to be depending on now from that small group of high earners in the state, or smaller group?
Well, let me just say that just in terms of non-New York State residents, rather, this $5 billion, the multi-millionaires tax, as we'll call it, will generate 164.7 million, and we do estimate that there are 13 non-resident taxpayers who will be impacted by those making over 100 million. Right, but so do you want to know the breakdown for each?
Yeah, I was just getting a sense, it's, the numbers I've seen are around 40% of our total PIT comes from that top 1%. With these changes, do we have any sense if there's going to be a change in that? Obviously, it would be somewhat higher. I just was curious.
Right, and this will increase. We think that actually the number will stay roughly the same, that about 1% will be paying about 40%
About 40, okay.
of the, once we add in the multi-year.
The one sense that I guess I would have, and the governor's used the term missile, I don't know, is this another or a second missile at that, our ability to retain and keep those high earners in New York State. And I know you just brought up some of those are out-of-state people who are working in New York. They're earning it here, but there still is the concern that if those business was where they're earning those dollars from were not located right here, that wouldn't be the case. And so, do you have a concern that we are, maybe subject to having those numbers decreasing, and therefore the dollars that we're anticipating by doing this could actually end up falling far short of what your expectations are?
I think we're confident that past evidence has shown that people don't really flee the state. There's a reason why these businesses are located in the state. Some of these individuals are getting other kinds of tax breaks under the federal code, but we also, as you know, support the governor's proposal for a payroll tax, a move towards a payroll tax system that companies can opt into, so that in terms of so that these New York State individuals will be able to reap will be able to reap the benefit of having a lower federal tax rate than they would otherwise if we adopt our payroll proposal. And we think that these are people who can afford to pay this additional revenue to support some of the important programs, particularly education, that we are increasing.
It is one of those things that I think we will see, depending on what we do and what the reactions will be, but certainly I would raise certainly concern with that. One of the things the governor did was freeze the property tax rebate, I'm sorry, he did not. You do in your proposal. So the governor has a proposal to give dollars back and have that growing over the next couple of years. You would freeze that. So that means property taxpayers who might have anticipated those dollars aren't going to get them.
That is correct in that we propose doing that, but at the same time we propose an increase in school aid, which should actually help keep property taxes at a lower level, and particularly school taxes, so that in the end it would balance out.
I think historically that is the case sometimes. It also is often that just we see spending go up. But with that, I know, do you have any other proposals if you're going to freeze that? And very honestly, I've never been a great fan of sending checks out to people myself, and I'm certain if you wanted to do that, I would be willing to maybe think about supporting that. But I also think we owe the taxpayers other means of relief. One of the things that some of my colleagues, or the colleagues on this side of the aisle and myself, propose state takeover of the Medicaid costs, which is a significant burden phased in over a number of years. Some of us have looked at other, obviously mandate relief and other types of things that might relieve our local taxpayers. You're freezing them there. I know you said about extra school aid, but anything else that you're doing in this budget that would give some relief, or might you consider in negotiations including some of those types of things that I think that the taxpayers, the common taxpayers of the state would feel some relief?
First, just to the Medicaid, the issue of the Medicaid expenses for the localities. First, several years ago, I think 2005, we instituted no more than the state would pick up above a 3% increase in Medicaid, and then in 2015, the full increase of Medicaid costs for localities is in fact picked up by the state, so that there is some partial movement in that direction that has increased over time. We have the middle class tax break that we enacted, that is still, that we enacted previously, that's now, that continues to be phased in. We, on some of the other mandate relief, we increase CHIPS funding. We reject shifting some summer special ed costs to the local school districts. Instead, we reject that $70 million cut by the governor. Instead, add that money. We put in some funding for land-based capital, which helps relieve properties that are abandoned and gets them back on the taxpayer property rolls. There are other programs that we do, and we increase, and we also have a $60 million increase in AIM. So those I think are the major actions relating to mandate relief.
And I do think that the education and local governments can embrace a number of those things that you give. That often, though, relates to the structures of the taxing entities themselves as opposed to the individuals paying the taxes, and where they benefit and depend on those state dollars. Clearly, I think our relief package, I would hope for the day that maybe that extends out a little bit more. If I might move to the issue, we've just seen completion of a trial and the issue related to some of the funds of the state and how they are dispersed to people, and questions over who's making decisions with those and how we oversee that. Anything in your budget that provides more accountability, transparency in our economic development funding for the state?
We do reject some of the governor's proposals for capital and establish because we do propose to provide transparency at the economic development entities. The economic development councils, we eliminate that capital and move it to, we do have language that is, I'll get it for you. that talks about more transparency, and reject some of the capital programs that we feel that the governor has proposed in this budget, has in the past, that lack that kind of transparency.
I know I would hope that this year's final negotiations might include more input from this side of the aisle, but I do hope that the majorities on both sides in dealing with the governor really focus in on this issue. We've seen the problems. I think to depend on the executive to provide the wording and the oversight format that we're going to use, I think is limited. And I would even say that as we move to the issues of dealing with the undesignated or pots of money that we have, that clearly we need oversight with that, and so that all of the money that we're spending in taxpayer dollars, we see that being used.
So some of what we do in the languages in the economic development area, I mentioned the REDCs. We require the council members to file an annual statement of financial disclosure similar to what we file, adhere to code of ethics and FOIL requirements in the public offices law, as well as subjecting their process to open meetings law. And we propose to establish in our the proposal before us annual reporting requirements and submission dates for the Startup New York program.
Helene, if we might just shift a moment, you in the healthcare area, you accept the shortfall account and provide language to accept funds due to the insurance conversions and whatever. And do you have a backup plan if that doesn't happen? So, you're depending on some resources within this budget plan.
Well, first of all, we instead of calling it a shortfall account, the way the governor did, we call it a healthcare stabilization fund in possible anticipation of something coming down the line. The appropriation in the budget and the account is for $1 billion. The governor, we have the language that says it can receive the proceeds of conversion, and and that is our plan.
So other than that one, are there other actual fiscal determinations that you're accounting for with uncertainties from the federal government? So we don't know all the impacts, right, even though we know what we have, but the analysis of that we're still learning, obviously.
We're still learning, and that is part of why we do have that $535 million in the reserve account. I know I've mentioned it several times, but that money is available, and we can see as we move forward if in fact we need it to fill any gaps in this year's budget.
Thank you very much. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, sir.
There's a number of things within a $170 billion budget that I can be positive about. I'm pleased that the majority, and would concur with them, that removing the language to give the governor or the budget director unfettered control to make changes if certain things happen without this legislative body and the Senate together responding and working out of the plan with the governor is a good thing. The fact that you're providing resources for local shared services, providing important funding for libraries and schools, eliminating the proposed star freeze that the governor had put forth, decoupling the tax code from the federal tax bill and decoupling the historic property rehab tax credit, and increasing AIM and local CHIPS funding. But also, as I review this bill and have had the chance to try to understand what its total impact is, it clearly focuses on raising revenues significantly in this state to continue spending at levels now we would reach $170 billion. If you divide that roughly by the 20 million people who live in this state, $8,500 for every man, woman, and child in New York State would be would be expended and money raised if this bill were to become the final budget. It would blow through the governor's 2% self-imposed cap in the state operations dollars by spending at 2.7. It would dramatically impact out-year gaps. Now, I heard from the majority that those gaps were not going to be so large. In fact, there might be surplus, but it's all done going forward on raising more and more revenues. $2 billion this year, $4 billion next year, and those dollars continue to increase, as does the debt of the state. It uses settlement money for annual as opposed to just one-time dollars. It creates a somewhat unclear, which I didn't even get to, unfortunately, during my time, but a 3% surcharge tax on our businesses in the state at a time when business environment here is struggling. In fact, one of the strengths of our business environment is the tax structure. And we have been able to reduce some of that. This starts moving us back in the wrong direction. It makes no deposits in the tax stabilization or rainy day funds, no mandate relief for communities except perhaps a trickle of $1 or two here and there. And the property tax relief. We freeze one place, maybe we put more money in, which could impact, but it doesn't really make a significant difference in how our local property taxpayers are going to continue to work, nor does it provide transparency in how the dollars and accountability and how the dollars of this state are handed out as we provide a lot of the capital dollars and other economic funding for the state. So due to the unsustainable spending that I would see and the not really meeting the needs and the demands of the taxpayers of the state, who I would say are left out in the cold with little hope of any relief in the near future. I would say, thankfully, from my perspective, this isn't the final document. That's going to be negotiated over the next few days. And Mr. Speaker, because of those issues, I'll be voting in the negative, but I hope that those who are listening, those who will be involved in those final negotiations will consider a number of the ideas and the proposals so that we might have an on-time budget, but one that truly serves the taxpayers of this state. Thank you.